the Prime Minister? Are things strained now because of what's happened?
Not at all. He saw the ad before I put it out. So did his chief of staff. They both saw it, and we moved forward on it. But again, we achieved our goal. As we say, mission accomplished. It was done. They're talking about it in the U.S., and they weren't talking about it before I put the ad on.
I did apologize to the president. President was offended by the act, or by the ad rather, and it's not something I would have done, which is to put in place that advertisement, and so I apologize to him. I'm the one who is responsible in my role as Prime Minister for the relationship with the President of the United States, and the federal government is responsible for the foreign relationship with the U.S. government. So things happen. We take the good with the bad, and I apologize to him. I saw him. We had dinner. We had dinner together. You saw it. There were a few of you were there, and we had a very good dinner. It was very cordial. And I spoke to him at the dinner privately, obviously. Privately, now it's public. There you go.
Thank you.
Since you're the person that's solely responsible for negotiations, did you inform Mr. Ford that this is something that you did not want to go forward with?
Yes.
And what came of that?
Well, you saw what came of it.
Ooh, somebody's lying. Let's go.
Welcome to Bakes on Things.
CTV News political commentator. Morning, Scott.
Good morning.
So we get the Prime Minister, too, making a bunch of news and seemed to be a little bit feisty at points with some media members after APEC today, in particular apologizing to Donald Trump for the ad that ran, that you just heard from Judy, too, featuring Ronald Reagan's voice. What do we make of that apology and that admission from the Prime Minister today?
Well, a very fascinating exchange because, as you say, there's a bunch of news in there. We find out that he did apologize to Donald Trump for the ad, saying that it offended him and he felt obligated, therefore, to apologize, saying that he had asked Premier Ford to not run the ad, although Ford went ahead. And I think in some respects, perhaps the most important piece of news in all of that is the Prime Minister's insistence and the Prime Minister's clear message of remembrance to other premiers and political leaders that it is the federal government that bears responsibility for managing this relationship. And so when a premier takes that relationship off course, it falls to the Prime Minister to answer for it, to be accountable to it, to try to manage it, and in a situation like this, to try to fix it. And it's a very difficult spot for Carney. I'll just add this, because politically, Canadians want two things that appear to be in contradiction. They want their political leaders to stand up to Trump and to tell him to go fly a kite. But at the same time, they want access to the U.S. market. They want security for jobs and for industry. And it appears to be very difficult to have both of those things at the same time. That is the political and negotiating box that Mr. Carney finds himself in.
Welcome back to Bakes on Things, the first sip for your Tuesday. We know somebody's lying, and CTV just showed that as well. I don't mean somebody got their wires crossed or somebody remembered it differently or somebody's staffer missed an email somewhere. I mean one of the most powerful politicians in this country right now, either Prime Minister Mark Carney and or Ontario Premier Doug Ford, is straight up lying to you, straight up telling Canadians something that cannot be true. The question is, which person is it? Here's what we know for sure because it's in black and white. CTV claims, well, Doug Ford claims that Mark Carney saw and approved the ads. Now, in October, we know, just to capitalize or recap this, Doug Ford's government spent roughly $75 million. Yes, $75 million. We all know it, on the ad that we are all familiar with now, the anti-tariff TV spot in the United States during the World Series, built around a 1987 Ronald Reagan speech. We all remember this one. The ad was aimed at Trump, the United States. Trump hated it. The Reagan Foundation hated it. Trump said it misrepresented Reagan. He said it was fake, and he immediately froze U.S.-Canada trade talks and slapped another 10% tariff on all of our stuff. That's not at all speculation. That's exactly what happened. So there's the black and white of all of it. Now, this one provincial ad, not federal, not diplomatic, not coordinated, blew up the national talks that Carney had been so far parading around the world, saying that they were close, that he and only he could manage these things. Well, now comes the part where somebody's lying, because Doug Ford came out and said that on the record that Mark Carney and Carney's chief of staff actually watched the entire ad, watched it right through, as you saw. And so they've seen the Reagan ad before it aired, and they approved it. Not just were vaguely aware an ad existed, we found out about it later, but he said they watched it and greenlit it before it came out. Now that's Ford's version. Now Mark Carney's version, the one he took to the camera in Asia just over this past weekend, after he just finished apologizing to Donald Trump over dinner, is the exact opposite story. Carney says, nope, no, I told Doug not to run it. I said, don't do that. Now look what happened. I said, this isn't how we do foreign relations. I said, this isn't something I would have done. I even apologized to Trump because he was offended. So that's Carney's version. So somebody's lying. Both of these stories cannot be true at the exact same time, unless we're living in two parallel universes we keep bouncing back and forth from. Either Doug Ford walked out of a meeting with the Prime Minister of Canada and decided to invent a brand new federal blessing out of thin air in front of the whole country, in front of the press, for no gain whatsoever to lie about this in any way, while the whole world can check his story, or Mark Carney is retrofitting the story after the fact because the ad detonated in his face, blew up his I can manage Trump story, you can trust me story, I'm the adult in the room story, that brand that he's tried to build for himself. And now he needs a fall guy. And if you look at motive, pattern, and who had something real to lose in Washington, it was just Mark Carney. So I wonder who's lying here, because every time it was Mark Carney. He's the only one that stands to lose. Let me walk you through all of this. First, motive. Carney went around all year selling Canadians, and especially liberal media, on the line that he was the one person who could stabilize relations with President Donald Trump, that this was adult to adult, central banker to deal maker diplomacy, that he was going to get the deal done. Then one Ontario ad, despite all the missed promises and missed due dates, from his own whiskey on the dock buddy, blows the talks clean off the table. I mean, clean off the table. And Trump adds 10% more on our exports to boot. If you are that prime minister, you have to walk back into every meeting with premiers, industry unions, and say, yeah, sorry, it collapsed because Doug bought an ad. I wouldn't want to be Mark Carney when I have to do that. That makes you look weak, not in control of your own federation, and absolutely not the guy who can manage Donald Trump when you can't even manage Doug Ford. So, of course, Carney suddenly remembers that he told Ford not to do it. That gives him an out that he knows will get played up by his paid-off mainstream media. But there's the motive. Second, there's pattern. This is not the first time Mark Carney has tried to have it both ways in the same week. Look at what he told reporters about the U.S. relationship and diversifying to Asia right after this fiasco happened. He was in South Korea talking to Trump, then turning around to talk up a thaw with Chinese relations in Canada and saying Canada is actively pursuing less reliance on the U.S. because, well, look, tariffs. We just got another 10%. That is classic cover your ass moment. When things go wrong with Washington, he pretends it was always part of a bigger, sophisticated globe-trotting strategy that's a pattern. Now, it is interesting that he met with his communist friends in China right after all this ad fiasco, but we digress. Third, there's jurisdiction. Carney's big talking point yesterday was foreign relations are federal, not provincial. Okay, great. Well, if it's federal, take control. If it's federal, not provincial, then why wasn't it federally stopped? You're the prime minister. You're in control here. If you truly said, do not run this ad, you put it in writing. You have your Privy Council office follow up to make sure he doesn't. You call the Ontario Secretary of Cabinet and you tell the ad buying U.S. network the federal government has concerns. You get it on the record. But nothing's on the record about that. And then when Doug runs it anyway, you can show all your receipts. Carney didn't show a thing, just said, no, I didn't. He just said, well, we saw some of it and I didn't like it. Well, that's not leadership. That's just storytelling. You're making that up. Then fourth, you've got all the logistics behind this. This was not a grandma's Facebook meme ad. This was a $75 million World Series placement, Reagan Archives, cross-border political torpedo. You do not buy that without Ottawa somehow being looped in, especially when the same two guys, Carney and Ford, have been doing buddy-buddy photo ops all summer long, joint tariff messaging and productive discussions on Trump all year long. The press already wrote in March that Ford was so buddy-buddy with Mark Carney, it was making federal conservatives nervous. That's on the record. That's something that was said. So we can drop the cute idea that they weren't talking about this ahead of time. And this means that Mark Carney is your liar. But let's go to a fifth thing. Character. Doug Ford has a lot of faults. There's no question about that. But he shoots from the hip. He likes the stunt. He likes the headline. We know that. He loves saying, best ad I ever ran, even when it fries the country's trade file. But one thing he's usually very careful about is dragging the federal government into something that they can disprove right away in an hour. Ford doubled down, though, this week and said Carney and his chief of staff both saw the ad and approved of it. You only say that if you are fully aware there were meetings, there were eyes on the spot, there were phone calls. And if Carney denies any of it, you can just leak it. That's a man saying, don't you dare hang this on me alone, Mark. And I believe him on that part, because I believe he does not say things that did not happen, and he might even have proof. So what does Carney do? He does what he always does. He goes somewhere international with cameras and 50 flags and says the exact words Donald Trump wants to hear. I told him not to run it, Donnie, but he did it anyway. I apologize. It was the province, not me. Well, that way, Trump doesn't see a weak PM who can't control his own country. He sees a PM who blames the province. That's not allyship, that's scapegoating, and it actually does make you look weak, and it tells you something else. Mark Carney is more worried about how he looks to Donald Trump than about telling Canadians the whole chain of events. On top of that, why does he want to be besties with Donald Trump? Oh, right, because Brookfield just signed $1 billion worth of deal with Trump for nuclear power. For a year, we have had to watch the Cottage Weekend Friendship Tour with Mark Carney and Doug Ford. The whiskey buddy narratives, the little joint appearances, the we may be a liberal PM, a conservative premier, but hey guys, hey folks, I don't worry about party lines. We both love jobs and trade. Okay, those storylines, get rid of them. That was never about policy. That was two men who both needed to be the Canadian who could handle Trump. They both wanted this spot. Carney needed it because he ran for PM promising it. Ford needed it because Ontario's economy lives and dies on access to U.S. buyers. So they formed a little relationship of convenience. You help my optics, I help yours. I tell people you're constructive, you tell people I'm collaborative. And the second something actually costs one of them real political capital, in this case, Carney's signature promise that he could keep trade talks alive, the friendship then vanishes. And Carney tosses Ford right under the bus. That's how you know it was never real. It was never a real friendship. It was never a real bromance. And even these stories aren't real. And here's the big takeaway for our first sip today. If this is how they behave with a single TV ad, what do you think is happening behind closed doors on the stuff we don't see in this country? If Ford is out there saying, no, you saw it, he and his chief of staff watched it and approved it, and Carney is saying, no, I said don't do it, that means your federal provincial coordination in the middle of a trade war with the United States of America is basically two morons freelancing and then blaming each other on live TV. This is absolute amateur hour in Canada, and it just cost us real money and real jobs. Let's also be real about the stakes. Trump didn't just hurt Carney's feelings. He ended talks and said he's hiking tariffs another 10%. That's Canadian exporters being sacrificed. Farmers, auto workers, automakers, forestry, steel, everybody paying for Carney and Ford's little ego war. If Carney actually approved it, apologizing after the fact is too late. If Carney actually didn't approve it and still couldn't stop it, then he's not the guy who can protect the national interest because he can't even control his premiers. Either way, it's not a good day for Mark Carney, and there is no one that can tell me this went well for him. So where do we land? We land here, the only version that makes political sense whatsoever, timeline sense and ego sense, is Doug Ford's truth. As much as I don't like the guy, I think he's the one telling the truth. Ford had no reason to invent federal approval. No reason whatsoever. He was already bragging it was the best ad he's ever ran. He was already in trouble. He would have worn it. The person who desperately needed a different storyline once Trump blew up the whole talks was Carney. Mark Carney needed the new storyline. So when I look at these two stories and I look at the pattern, I look at the motive, I look at who was on the stage and on what stage in particular, and who was apologizing to whom, we land on this. The liar is Mark Carney. Carney is the one smoothing the story for Washington. Carney is the one pretending federal jurisdiction is something he actually enforced by telling Doug Ford no. But if he had told him no, then why didn't he just take it down or not put it up at all? Carney is the one pretending he advised against it, while his own chief of staff was, according to Ford, sitting there watching it with him and got it greenlit. Carney is the one with the history of rewriting the frame after the outcome is already bad. And it tells us something ugly. It tells us that Mark Carney will protect Mark Carney first. Even if it means humiliating a premier in his own country, he's been clinking glasses with, I should say, with all year long by the fire. Even if it means leaving Ontario to take all the heat from a furious President Donald Trump. Even if it means pretending the federal government is just a helpless bystander while a province blows up a national trade negotiation. Everything about this is dirty. Everything about this smells like Mark Carney lies. So here's how I'd close this, okay? Somebody's lying, and we know it. We don't know who specifically, but we think we do. And when two politicians tell opposite stories, you don't pick the one that flatters them. You pick the one that actually explains what happened. Trump was offended. Carney apologized. Carney wants the talks back. Therefore, Carney needed a villain. And that villain that he chose was his whiskey-drinking buddy, Doug Ford. Now, if things keep going this way, the villain will be you, the Canadian taxpayer, for not understanding how complicated this all was. Just make more sacrifices, as Mark Carney says. We might have to make more sacrifice. Anyway, do you think he's lying? Who do you think is lying? Really, first, put it in the comments. Mark Carney? Is it Doug Ford? Who's lying? Who's getting into Trump's good books? Who's not? What's going on here? Somebody's lying. That's the bottom line. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and of course, comment down below. This country is wildly spiraling, isn't it? We will be back this afternoon for our last word. Have yourselves a fantastic Tuesday. It's budget time. Obviously, on the last word, we won't be able to talk about the budget yet either because it comes out late in the day, but we will cover that on Wednesday morning. For now, we'll have a different episode for you here at 4 o'clock today on the last word. For now, have yourselves a great Tuesday.